Are you able to hear me, Adam?
Yes, I am loud and clear. We'll give it a couple more minutes, and then I'll kick in and we'll get underway. All right, hello everybody, and thank you for joining Discoverygarden's February webinar. My name is Adam Smith. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Discoverygarden. Here at Discoverygarden, we're committed to developing new modules and tools that are designed to add benefit to the Islandora software. And this month, we are pleased to announce the availability of the Islandora ContentDM Migration module. We have completed many migrations from Islandora, from various other sources to Islandora, ContentDM probably being the most relevant one. So we're pleased to present this today. With me, I have Stephen Perkins. Stephen is our Senior Solutions Architect here at Discoverygarden, and he's going to take us through the back-end ins and outs of the module. So with that, I'll pass things over to Stephen.
Good day, everybody. Thanks for coming. Pleased to have you here. So I'm going to start with a brief presentation to talk about the modules, give you an overview of the solution and how it works, and then we'll go through a live demonstration where we'll actually migrate a small collection over into Islandora from ContentDM. So anytime we develop software, we start to think about what kinds of impacts do we want to have? What are the issues that we're trying to resolve? And in this case, migrations are always difficult. You're coming from one platform to another. You're dealing with sometimes disparate data sets. Sometimes the data sets have issues. Platforms are different. So there's always a lot of work involved. What we wanted to do here was to be able to provide people with a standardized, documented process for being able to perform this kind of migration, be able to empower clients to be able to manage their migrations to the levels that they have capability. You'll see in a bit that this is a process that you can participate in to the level that your resources, or your human and skills resources allow you to. By allowing you to do that, it reduces reliance on a service provider. There's a lot of programming involved in a migration process, but if we can make that accessible to you, then and have you a user interface for you and teach you how to do some of the parts that are labor intensive, then it takes away reliance upon us, and that accordingly reduces costs. Now, most often, migrations aren't just a matter of transferring data from one system to another. There's usually some other work that needs to happen. Generally, there's going to be data refinement. Doing a migration when you go to get your data out of your legacy system, whatever it is kind of like heading into your closet with a really high-powered searchlight. You quite often find what you want, but you also find some things that you don't want, or some things that maybe you need to clean up. So we want to allow a place in these processes for people to be able to do some refinement to the data. We'll talk a bit about some examples of that in just a bit. Also, what we found in ContentDM migrations is people don't always store their preservation grade assets inside of ContentDM. Sometimes they have lower resolution versions of images, for example, or other types of derivatives, and they've stored the preservation grade assets separately. We recommend that all assets be in a repository and under active management. So we've allowed for a step in the migration process that lets you bring those into Islandora. So you can actually swap out the assets that are in ContentDM for the preservation grade assets and regenerate those derivatives from them. Another thing you need to do with migrations is be able to do an iterative process refinement. So what that means is things rarely go right on the first pass. So you want to have an environment where you can cycle through a process until it's perfected, because you always want this to be as automated as possible. To do that, you want to be working in a safe environment. You don't want to be doing this in your production environment. You need to have a staging area where you can run something in, review it, find out where there's any issues, address those in the process, and then repeat as necessary until it's perfect and you can run it in a production environment. Also, by having a separate environment, you can do flexible scheduling. If we've empowered you to do some of the work or even all of the work yourselves, then it can be done on your schedule. You're not tied to a vendor schedule for work. And if you're not under the gun of running it into production, it has to go right, then you can work in your staging environment at your leisure. Also, there are space management issues involved. Anytime you're going to do iterative processes with large amounts of data, you need to be concerned with the amount of storage that you're using. And if you have regular backup procedures, you also need to be concerned with how much storage it's taking up. For instance, if you're running snapshot backups in your production environment, quite often those work on what we call deltas, or differences that happen day to day. So they only record things that change. Well, if you're shuffling a lot of data in and out doing iterative migrations, those snapshots can grow to quite a big size because a lot is changing. By working in a staging environment, you can set up separate policies and more effectively manage the space around that. So we wanted to design something that addressed all of these needs. And here's an overview of what we came up with. So for any migration, whether it's from ContentDM or any place else, there's really kind of 4 basic steps. You need to get the data out of your source platform, what we often call your legacy platform, to get your legacy data. You need to be able to map that data from its current form to a target model. Not all content management or digital asset management system or institutional repositories use the same data model, or you may be also crosswalking from one metadata standard to another, as we'll be doing in this process. So you need to be able to have a mapping step that lets you map from the format of the legacy data to the target model that you have defined. You need to be able to refine the data if and as needed, and then do an ingest step to get into your new platform. The components for doing this in Islandora consist of a staging server, and that staging server has an Islandora environment. It is a replica of your production environment, and there'll be an SFTP site. That is so that you can upload assets that you want to ingest as a part of that swap I discussed. I'm going to demonstrate that today. We review the client's production server for any upgrades that are needed. Data migrations are resource intensive. You've got a lot of data to move. You need to generate a lot of derivatives. So we generally review the CPU and memory resources, the amount of disk space, and whether job servers are needed to manage this type of work on a server before we go ahead and set up the modules. There's the modules themselves, and there's a bundle of professional services that we provide to support you in doing this. We give you training, and then as you need it, we can provide consulting for metadata. We can provide you subject matter expertise, help you with your data mapping, refinement, help you execute the processes, and also teach you how to evaluate success. It's not enough to just move the data over. You need to be able to verify that you have 100% fidelity in the data, that your mapping has gone correctly, that everything that was supposed to go in has now shown up in its proper form. And there's ways that we can help you to do those evaluations. So where Islandora fits is shown in this sort of context diagram here. So we're showing Islandora as a system, and the squares that you see at the top of the screen are the external entities that Islandora interacts with. These entities can be another software, they can be human resources, they can be web services. and the arrows show data transfers between them. So within Islandora, we've got our two modules. There's a module and a submodule, and the user interface for doing the ContentDM migrations is in the ContentDM to mod staging area. So the content is coming in the form of digital files from ContentDM. Your alternate files, these are the preservation grade resources that you optionally may want to map into your process, will come from your SFTP site. And the migration manager, that could be you, it could be us, will interact with these pieces. They will exchange, they will upload exports from ContentDM to Islandora. And if they need to do iterative refinement of the data, they will interchange the output of the ContentDM XML to mods crosswalk files. So there's some back and forth that can happen there. If optionally you're hosted on Amazon Web Services, your storage and backups will be made to those web services. You could actually substitute a square here for whatever web services you're using. This is just an example. So this gives you a picture of who all the players are and how Islandora fits. The steps that we go through to do this are to take exports from ContentDM. There will be two involved, and I'll show you why it takes two of them shortly. There's a ContentDM standard XML and a ContentDM custom XML export. We create a map that says, here's how we want to map the data from ContentDM XML into the mods, the metadata object description schema that is commonly used within Islandora for descriptive metadata. If you have alternative assets that you want to map in, we create a map of those. I'll show you how to do that. And then we make a request in Islandora. We log in, we head for the user interface for running the migration. We request a crosswalk, and then that stages a mods file. This takes the exports from ContentDM, it crosswalks them to mods, and sets it up in a staging area. You then have a choice of whether you go ahead and run the ingest directly, or whether you download the mods file to perform some data cleanup operations before you do that. If you do, then you perform your data refinement, request the ingest, and then review the results. Optionally, if things do or don't go as you want, you may decide they're perfect as they went in, or you may need to rerun. You may spot, oh, I did a bad mapping, or oh, I forgot to regularize those values in that one particular subject. You have an interface that lets you go ahead and iteratively perform this process. So you do that all in your staging area, and then once it's perfected, you just make the request on your production server and run the actual final migration. Who does what? So, as I was saying, the idea was to empower our clients to be able to do a lot of this work themselves. It's time effective, it saves a lot of money, and it lets you work at your leisure. Now, so the ContentDM exports, those are handled by your ContentDM administrator. The crosswalk mappings you can do yourselves, or we can perform them for you. We've had really good luck so far training people to do this. And so some of the prerequisites for these various tasks are listed on the right here. It's good to have, expert mod standard knowledge would be good, but the Library of Congress documentation is pretty fantastic. And in my experience, most digital humanists are pretty good with this and already have XML skills. Only basic spreadsheet skills required for creating an asset map. And I'll show you how to do all of these. Processing the requests, you'll just need a module training session that comes with the modules. We do a quick training session, shows you how to use the user interface. It's quite simple. And then for data refinements, definitely going to need some intermediate XML skills, or intermediate scripting skills are very helpful. I don't know about you. I don't like fixing data by hand. I like to be able to do it programmatically. But again, you can do this yourselves, or you can request our assistance. And then it will be to clients to evaluate their data. But if you need help in deciding what success is and how to check it, then again, we can assist with that. So for the demonstration, I'm going to show you what the ContentDM XML exports look like. I'm going to show you how we create a mods map, how we map in what I call alternate assets, or I want to swap in my high-res images per se for the ContentDM low-res versions, how to use the modules, and how to do refinement of your data. So the reason we have two of these exports is the ContentDM standard export has the hierarchical structure information to migrate complex objects. And so migrating compounds of any kind, which may be books or different types of hierarchical structures, it has that information. But it doesn't allow for mapping of non-standard metadata field names. The export just comes out and says unmapped, 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 which is a bit difficult to, if not impossible, to do a data mapping for. The custom export lets you map those non-standard metadata field names, but it doesn't have any structural information. And since we want to be able to migrate structure, we need the standard and the custom. Now, I want to give you a step here, just a quick warning at the bottom that you'll see about validating these. When you retrieve these exports, they will not necessarily be valid XML. You may find malformed tags coming out of ContentDM or improperly formed XML entities, which are character references. So I recommend that you work in a validating XML editor and check them. My favorite is Oxygen, but you could also use XML Spy, Sublime, or any other package. But you'll definitely want to check those. The mods mapping is done using a mods file that creates a target template. I'll show you these momentarily. Basically, this is a way of you saying, okay, this element in the ContentDM export that says subject now becomes a mod subject tag. Now, how do we know to map over content model selections? For you people that are already Islandora users, you'll know that there is a broad array of content models available. And what we mean by a content model is something that describes what type of asset this is. Is it an image? Is it an audio file? Is it a link to something else that exists outside the dams? Is it a PDF file, etc.? So in Islandora, we need to have a way to figure out what something coming in is. Now, there's a base mapping that is used by this process that maps file extensions to Islandora content models. So when it says sees a PDF file, it says, oh, you belong to the PDF content model. Now, you might decide that you want to do this differently. For example, when you want to bring over books, books come out of ContentDM just as images. So the pages come over and they say, I'm an image. Well, by default, that's going to map to an image model within Islandora, where you may want to map it to a page content model. You can do that in the intermediate steps that I'll show you. Compound objects. So we have to deal with the fact that in ContentDM, it doesn't necessarily do nested collections, but it does nested compounds. And that's a bit different data model than we use for doing that in Islandora. So the default process that we use, and again, this can be overridden, is that a single level compound object becomes an Islandora compound object. And we're going to see one of those shortly. A hierarchical compound is going to come over as a set of sub-collections as their members. So if you have a 2 or 3 level deep compound object, each level will become a collection, and everything that is a member of that compound will be associated with it. Alternate asset mappings, we're just going to build a CSV map of files. We'll take a look at that momentarily. And I'm going to show you some standard data refinements. Now, there are standard fixers for names and subjects that are they're an outcome of the way the process works. And there are some common data issues that we see in client data frequently. Regularization of structures or tagging, and also normalization of values. And you may need to change values to conform to the schema. I'm going to show you an example of that in our demo. You also may choose at this time to restructure collections. All of these are kind of examples of what I tell people are opportunities. When you do a migration, people that have been through it kind of groan and go, oh, I remember that. But really, they're an opportunity. If you bring the data out and you find things that you can improve, here's your chance to improve it. So one of the things that we've seen people do already is the ability to restructure collections. They'll bring something out and say, oh, this is just in one massive collection. I'd really like to subdivide it into a more granular set of a half a dozen based on a set of criteria. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that you can do in these refinement steps we're talking about. Now, a few details before we head to the demo. Can't emphasize enough making sure that you have space. When you get we generally base our estimates off of the ContentDM usage reports, which tell you how much disk space your assets are taking up. What they don't tell you is how much space your derivatives are taking up currently and may take up when you move them to Islandora. Also, if you are doing an alternate asset swap, you'll need to base space estimates off of the amount of disk space that the alternate files take up, plus a factored for derivatives that we can give you. It changes based on the content model. If you're being space conscious, then some of the solution packs within Islandora can help you save space if you don't use them. So for instance, the book solution pack gives you the option of whether or not you want to create a PDF derivative along with all of the JP2 tiles and OCR data streams that it creates. So if your site isn't set up for people to download books in PDF, you don't need that. You can shut it off. And it can save a lot of space because those PDF derivatives are generally just created and take up the same amount of file space as the preservation grade asset, because they actually contain the image. So there's some little tricks of the game that are good to know. If you need to go back in time, and this is something that you can use to determine success, the process actually stores a copy of the ContentDM XML for each object as a data stream on the Islandora object. So if during your review, or heaven forbid, 8 months down the road, you catch something, you can always go back and reference what came out of ContentDM. All right, well, enough of this blather. Let's do something. So I'm logged into an Islandora instance that we put up from the webinar, and I've got some things prepared to run a migration. So let's take a look at the exports. I'm gonna open these up so you can sort of see what the files are that you're going to get. Let's just increase the size of this so it shows better on the screen. So this is a standard ContentDM XML export. There's a root element and the metadata, and it contains each record within an element. Now, the standard DC elements will come out, but anything that you've used in your collection that does not have a standard DC name is just going to come out marked as unmapped. Now you can see that these are different elements. Clearly that's, latitude and longitude. We can't map them this way if they're all called the same thing. But what we do need here is the hierarchy of structure for compound objects, and that is in this XML file. So here you'll see something that's a compound object, and it's giving me a structure hierarchy. And our program can use this to create structures within Islandora, so we need this export. Now, in the custom XML export, what you're able to do within ContentDM is you're able to name these elements. You can say, okay, this element should be a topical subject, this one is a corporate name. Now, these don't have to be names that are based on any standard, but they do have to be unique across element types. And what they're going to be used for is for the mapping process. So now that we've distinguished what everything is in the metadata record, we have the ability to go ahead and create a mods mapping. Now, the way we designed this so that basically you can teach anybody that knows mods or can learn mods how to do it, was your map is actually a mods file. And within the mods file, you use XML processing instructions to tell the Islandora module where to migrate the XML content from ContentDM. So now I've got a valid conforming mods file, and I'm going to say, put my publisher in the appropriate place, build the abstract from the description. This is a very simple map. And there's also a syntax for mapping things into attribute values. You can put them into more than one place if you want. So it's not like it has to be a one-to-one mapping. You can map the same element into multiple locations in a mods file if you want. But the neat thing about this is, well, I've got a valid mods file here. I kind of can't go wrong with the mapping, except if I put something in the wrong place. But it's simple, it's standardized, and it makes this process repeatable. If I need to make an alteration to my mapping, I change it here, I rerun the process, and we're good to go. So these are my resource files, along with, I'm actually going to map in some assets that are on the server. In this particular case, I've said, okay, I don't want those low-res versions. I've got some high-res TIFF files for the images I'm migrating over, and I would prefer to substitute those for the assets that are in ContentDM when I do my ingest. Now I'm just looking at this in a text editor, but all this is a comma delimited file, and it contains the identifier for, this is the ContentDM identifier for an object. This is in the file, and it contains a path on the server where that image is. So now when the process comes across the ContentDM object with this identifier, it's going to say, oh, you don't want to use what's in ContentDM. I'm going to swap in this file. Now, if this isn't present, what it's going to do is actually use a web service from ContentDM to directly retrieve the binary object from ContentDM and migrate it into Islandora. So in Islandora, I'm going to form up a request. First thing I need to do is to create a target collection. And in this case, have I done that? Yes, I have. I have a webinar demo collection here. So this is an empty collection. This is where I want everything I'm going to migrate to show up. Under my Islandora menu, in the Utilities menu, you'll see there's an Islandora ContentDM to Mod Staging module, and I'm going to select New. We're going to make a new request. So in this form, gives me the opportunity to upload my exports. So I'm going to grab my standard exports, upload that, grab my custom exports, get my alternate assets map, and I'll need to load up my mods mapping template. You'll need to know the base URL of your ContentDM site and the identifier of the collection that you want to ingest to. And I'm going to click Create File, and that's just crosswalked everything into a mods file. Now, I've just been taken to a new tab. You'll see I'm on the Current tab. This tab will store all of the files that you've created, and then there are some actions associated with them. If I was happy with everything here, I would just say to generate. Now in Islandora, when you use the batch ingest module, which is this is connected to, it creates a batch. That batch has a list of objects to be ingested. It will ingest them and it manages them. There's a place where I can go and see a report and say, hey, were there any errors? Did everything go in successfully? Show me everything in the batch so I can quickly link to them. So under batch actions, I can choose to generate a batch. That'll go ahead and run this ingest. But I know I've got some issues in this data that I want to fix before I run the ingest. So you'll see that there's some file actions that I can replace or delete this file. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how intermediate processing can work. I'm going to download the mods file. And I've set up a little folder to show some intermediate processing. I'm just going to drop this in my inbox. I can make some changes to the data before we ingest it. And this will also give you a preview of how it's crosswalked into mods. So again, I'm opening this up in my XML editor. And now you'll see that everything in that ContentDM file has been walked to the mods. Ooh, I'm seeing some validation errors. What's that? Well, I've mapped a resource type into a mods element that has a restricted vocabulary in the schema. So this value is going to be incorrect. The only thing incorrect about it is that it needs to be case folded. Now, that's a very small example of something that you might want to address. So it kind of makes good fodder for today's example. So what I've done is I have a small library of scripts that I'm using, a small Perl script and some XSL, extensible style sheet language that we frequently use for manipulating XML data. And that's going to run some processes. It's going to fix up some things I know need to be addressed in the name elements, in the subject elements, and it's also going to affect some repairs. If there's any compound objects, one of the things that ContentDM does is it'll make a compound object even out of a single object. which kind of doesn't look that great when it comes over to Islandora. So we have a standard process that just removes what we call single-page compounds. So all I'm going to do to affect that, and again, you can do this by hand, you can do it with your favorite scripting tool, just please work in a validating environment. So I'm just going to run these fixes. I'm lazy, so I do stuff with scripts. And now in my out bin, I've got my mods file, and I'm getting the green light from Oxygen. Yes, your file is valid, and my resource type elements are all set. So you'll see that the script went ahead and affected a fix to the type of resource values to make them conform to the mod schema. So that's an instance of where you're normalizing values that are coming out of the source data. So now that that's done, I've done my intermediate processing, I can replace this file. I'll upload my new fixed up mods file. And now I'm ready to do my ingest. I'm going to get asked a couple of questions. Yes, I do want to ingest the objects, because you can post with the batch processor, you can postpone ingesting them and do them at your leisure. You can just line them up if you'd like. And they use Gearman. Gearman is a job server. Generally, we recommend that people have this installed if they're doing migrations. If you do have it and you're running a large file set, you would select it. This just has a few objects. I'm just going to generate the set. And now this is going to do the real ingest. So it's creating objects. It's going to grab the binary files, and it's going to create derivatives for them. Everybody take a sip of water. And now we're done. So I can mark this as complete. I can choose to rerun an ingest. There are a lot of actions that help you with the iterative processing. As I said, when we use Islandora batch, that means this will show up in the batch sets. So I can view the items that were ingested. I can check for any errors. Oh, good, there are none. Always very good when you're doing a demo. But now my objects should be in the system. They should be in my test collection. So I'm going to browse over to the test collection. And here we go. So we don't have any thumbnails set up, so let's see how some of these look. So you see, we'll have the viewport shows the derivatives that do the display, and the metadata has come over and displays. Solar has probably already indexed this and exposed it for search, and your test collection is over. I want to take a look at the data streams for this to show you. We've had our mods data stream created, and a copy of the original ContentDM data stream is here, as I was saying before, for reference. So if you're doing a review, you want to come back and say, okay, I want to put this side by side with the mods file and take a look and make sure everything came over. Then you can do that. I also want to take a look at a compound object. So this is a compound object that came over from ContentDM with a couple of images, and you can see that the structure has been retained. And we've got the individual objects. So that's a quick demo of the modules, how they work. And now I guess we can open it up for any questions and answers that we can provide.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a great presentation for sure. I would ask that people continue to stay muted. If you have a question, please type it into the question or the chat window. And we'll just give it a little bit of time to generate some questions. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'll just let everybody know that I'm going to be sending out a link to this entire recording later on today. As well, I'm going to include some information about Discoverygarden for those of you that might be new to us, and some information about Islandora software and the community that supports it as well. All right, so we do have one question in. What time frame do archives usually use this for migration?
So that depends on a few things. So one would be the number of collections that they have, their scope, and really how rapidly people can apply themselves to creating the mapping. So one of the reasons having more collections can take more time is within ContentDM, you can end up where different data structures have been used across different collections. And for each one of those, you're going to have to create a map. So if everything's in an ideal situation, you've got 10 collections and maybe there's minimal deviation between them, you might be able to use a single map. But if there's a lot of deviation in how people have done the markup of descriptive metadata, then you'll have more mapping work.
All right, next question. Is there a record count limit for a ContentDM collection to ingest into Islandora?
Great question. So no, there is no record limit for getting them in, but there are limitations to what you can do through the user interface owing to resources. So if it's something that's really big, the modules are built on top of the batch process, so we can assist people to process really big requests from the command line using drush scripting, but no limits.
Okay, next question. Dublin Core doesn't easily allow for the authorities to be incorporated, but mods does. Do you go about adding authorities to mods prior to migrating the metadata, or do you default to a local authority instead?
I'm not sure that I understand the question in the sense that when you say adding authorities, do you mean, are you referring to adding name authority records? Because basically we just work with what's in the source data. You can do or have us do whatever you want to integrate in the mods data once it's crosswalked that you wish. I'm assuming maybe you're referring to checking corporate names or subjects or personal names by a vocabulary to be sure that they conform.
Yes, thanks. Perfect.
That can be done, yes.
Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. So there we go. Source data is using an authority, but it isn't named as such. What is the best way to indicate this when mapping to mods?
Well, the mod schema has an attribute for you to indicate the authority and the unique resource identifier of that authority. You can do that actually just by putting it in the mods map. My screen's still shared. So let's go back to, where's my mods map? So for instance, if I knew that this personal name of the creator was coming from, I can list the name of the authority and also the authority of the URI of the name. So if I put this in my map and you know that what's coming from the creator field conforms to this authority, you can do it that way. So that's a good point, that there's a lot that you can do with the maps to enrich the data.
All right, next question. How does the migration tool work with the Islandora book batch, which requires that individual mods files be created for each image file?
It creates individual mods files for each image file.
All right, we'll give it a few more moments for some more questions. In the meantime, I do have some meetings scheduled with some of the participants on this call to talk about the module further. But if you would like to set one up, please respond to the information email I send later, and I'll gladly set up a meeting. All right, well, with that, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in. I'd like to again thank you all for joining today. It was very informative, and thank you, Stephen, for the presentation. Like I said, I'll be following up with a complete information package later on today. But stay tuned for the next webinar in March, information on which will be released in early March. So thank you again for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure.